My name is Ray O'Keefe. I'm an alcoholic. I'm formerly the owner of the world-famous Mamaroneck Group, which I sold to my son Billy when I left here. I'm currently a member of the totally unknown Miami Men's Group, which I'm in the process of syndicating and issuing stock for. It's an amazing thing to look out and see all these people. And remember the first breakfast in the Seven Pines in Mamaroneck with 125 people. Good eggs and Italian sausage. And actually, I am not the founder of the Uni Breakfast. It was Harry's idea back then, and I just ended up doing all the work because that's how Harry operates. I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous a long time. You can tell by looking at me, I've been somewhere for a long time. And I bring you the warm and the fraternal greetings of the Miami Men's Group. At our business meeting on Thursday, they voted and gave me the authority to extend their best wishes to you. The vote of our group was 11-7. I think I should tell you about my drinking. I don't want you to miss any of this. It's a thrill a minute. I grew up in one of the neighborhoods in New York City, and my neighborhood was rough, and it was tough, and it was Irish. You may not understand it here in Westchester County, but they actually drank in that neighborhood. You would see people under the influence of alcohol. And if you looked where I lived, you'd see a little drinking. My mother, the widow O'Keefe, was known to take a drink from time to time. And when the pressure got on, Kitty would go for the light wines and the spirits, and something would fly, usually one of the children. My brother Billy, on the other hand, was a very bad drinker, and in a neighborhood of Irish drunks, Billy O'Keefe stood out. So when I showed up at the local joint and ordered up whatever it was they were serving 14-year-olds that afternoon, no one paid any attention to me. It was just another O'Keefe going through the system. I don't really recall what it was they gave me that day. I suspect it was a beer because that was the neighborhood drink. But whatever it was, I liked it. I liked everything about it. I liked the way it looked, and I liked the way it smelled. And I like the way it tastes. And I like what it did for my head. And I like the noise and the smoke and the confusion. And I like the fist fights and the Irish music. I like the bullshit. That's what I like. I was going through the Catholic school system, in a manner of speaking, and I got into all of the trouble and difficulties you might imagine a young man would get into trying to go through that system drunk. I was thrown out of high school a number of times. I held a neighborhood record for being thrown out of high school, a record previously established by my brother Billy. When I was finished with high school, or when they were finished with me, because somebody made a mistake, I think, in a small school in New England, I got a chance to leave the neighborhood, and I went off to college, and my drinking changed. In the neighborhood, we drank beers, and we drank shots and beers. We call those bats and balls. But when I got north, there were no bars in that state, just restaurants. And these people were drinking beer out of a bottle, and they were singing college songs. And they wore white shoes in the wintertime. And being a man of no particular moral fiber, I got a pair of white shoes. I learned the words of some of those songs. I got very collegiate. World War II was just about over. It was relatively safe. Things were pretty slow on the campus. So one day I got a haircut and I joined the Navy. And I ended up on a minesweeper in San Francisco. And I hate to be indelicate in front of such a nice gathering, but I have to tell you, I had a lot of trouble with my kidneys when I drank. And in the Navy, we slept 3 to a tier. And a new man slept on top. Don't get ahead of me, will you, for heaven's sake? Think this is easy here? I came back from my first liberty in San Francisco with all the beer in me I could drink. And I went to sleep, and I had one of these attacks. And I met the fellow that slept below me that night. I guess he figured he'd be wet sometime in his naval career. It just hadn't occurred to him it would happen while he was sleeping. I was immediately transferred to a lower bunk. The rest of my naval career was undistinguished, and I came back home, and I was undecorated, unhonored, unloved. And everything was under control in the neighborhood. The widow was out in the weeds somewhere. My brother Billy was absent without leave from the New York City Police Department. Billy had invited a citizen of the Puerto Rican ancestry off a 5-story roof, and the citizen had bounced and lived to identify the Irish cop. So Billy went west. He went into a more peaceful line of work. He went back in the Marine Corps. The government was giving veterans $20 a week. For 52 weeks, I qualified for a check or two. I gravitated to the local joint. I took up the game of shuffleboard, and I was planning a life of petty crime with some of my boyhood companions when I had one of those clear thoughts that come from time to time. I remembered that I had gone to college. So I got on a bus and I went back up there, and I arrived in the middle of a blizzard, and I walked into this place, and there they were, sitting around the table, drinking beer out of a bottle, singing those songs, wearing those shoes. So I got another pair of shoes. And now a grateful government was sending me a check every month, so I was moderately solvent and therefore moderately drunk all the time. One day I was staggering around the campus in my usual condition, and I saw a list of names on a bulletin board of people who were qualified to graduate. And my name was on the list. And that was excellent news. I thought I had another year to go. I notified the widow of this great event, and she came north, and that was a very tender sight. The widow and her youngest child staggering around under the elm. When I got back to the neighborhood, the question was what to do, and my uncles, who ran the family, had voted unanimously that I become a New York City policeman, because that's what my father had been, that's what my brother had been, and that's what all my uncles and cousins were doing, except for the 2 morons that worked for the telephone company. But I told them I had my own plans, and then I was off to law school. And they received that with mixed emotions, but that's what happened. I went to law school. And I didn't know anything about lawyers or law school. We didn't have any lawyers in my neighborhood. We had cops and we had priests. We really didn't need any lawyers. I don't like to be disloyal to the profession that's made Jack Keegan a millionaire. But I got to tell you, when I got to law school, I was in the middle of the biggest collection of stiffs that had ever assembled under one roof. God, they were deadly. Everybody had on a suit, and they all wore eyeglasses. So I got a suit. I got a pair of glasses I really didn't need. And I showed up. I was in uniform. I was ready to roll. And I looked around for someone to drink with, a companion. My mother always told me, play with nice boys your own age. But nobody drank in that crowd. They were all students. They were all studying. They were all grinding away. So I went on the wagon for law school. And I didn't drink at all in my first year, and very rarely thereafter. And the result of all of that was I did well. And when I came out, I was taken into a large, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, Wall Street law firm. They hired me as sort of the resident immigrant. It was not a total loss, however. I did learn to say, "Oh, really," instead of "no shit." You're as bad as I can remember. My superiors there determined I should be trained as a trial lawyer, and so I was sent up to the courthouse in New York City to learn my trade. And I wasn't in the courthouse very long when I discovered that all the really smart guys were across the street in a saloon. So I moved my office into the saloon, and I learned to drink in a different, a more civilized fashion. Very few members of the profession were knocking down bats and balls where anybody could see them. I discovered scotch in a tall glass with water and ice, and you sip on that. It takes a little while, but it gets the job done. I was introduced to all of the mysteries and all of the rituals that surround the very, very dry martini. And to this morning and to this minute, my love, my admiration, and my affection for the very, very dry martini is surely the greatest case of unrequited love the world has ever seen. I was so loyal to those things, and they almost destroyed me. It was around this time of life when one of my hormones broke loose and lodged in my brain. So it was time to be married. And I had located a lady, or she had located me. Who knows how this works out. So I got married right before the war. I don't mean any of the world wars. I mean the war between me and Mrs. O'Keefe. Mrs. O'Keefe is here. Mrs. O'Keefe is, as you all know, is my current wife. I always call her my current wife. It keeps her on her toes. We got married and war broke out. And we settled down and set up housekeeping. My mother used to say to her friends, "Raymond lives in the country." I had 3 rooms in Mount Vernon. Miss O'Keefe then began to produce children in a rather boring and monotonous fashion, and with the regularity that is known only to the devout Roman Catholic. And after about the second of these events, I received a phone call from the law school I had attended, and I was invited to see the dean, and I went to see the dean, and he appointed me to the faculty, and I became Professor O'Keefe. And I responded to that appointment with great alacrity, and there I was, the boy professor. And I really wasn't sure what there was in my background that justified that appointment, and I also knew that I drank a great deal. So I resolved that I would drink less, and I entered into a period of trying to control drinking that I was very unsuccessful at that. But as the time went by, and after a period of time, it occurred to me that I was able to teach these subjects, and therefore, why should I worry about not drinking? So I went back out to drink the way I always liked to drink. And I really only knew the one way to drink. My father died when I was about 2, and my brother Billy was 4 years older. And Billy was not at all like me. Billy was very tall and good-looking and handsome and athletic and all that stuff that I wasn't. And Billy was my hero, and I tried to do everything just like Billy. And I drank like Billy. I drank until I fell down, or the place went on fire, or the cops showed up, or something would happen to interfere with the drinking. I would see people leaving, and I would be wondering, where the hell are they going, you know? And in this period of time, too, I roamed around the city of New York and tried to become a very important person. I was a bit of a man on the town. I went to 5,000 bars. I got laid 3 times. Well, actually 2. But I was that close with the other. I like to think about those things. And Ms. O'Keefe and I ended up with a nice home in Larchmont, and we had it up to 5 or 6 kids, and all the stuff that goes with a nice house in Larchmont and 5 or 6 kids. And I was working, and I was even politicking. I ran for office one time and lost. And I was teaching, and had you asked me in those days how I was doing, I would have told you I was doing very well. As a matter of fact, I would have told you I was doing very well whether you asked me or not. Truth of the matter was, at this time, at age 34, I had turned into a daily drunk, and my day would have killed an ordinary man. I used to come to in the morning in that wet bed because the problem with the kidneys had continued unabated all those years, and I would struggle out of that wet sack, and I would begin my morning aerobics. My aerobics were performed kneeling on the floor of a bathroom with my head in a bowl. And I'd have all the water running, the water in the shower and the water in the tub and the water in the sink, because I did not want Ms. O'Keefe and all those little O'Keefes to know that Professor O'Keefe was dying. And I would come downstairs, much like Santa Claus, with a sack of wet laundry over my shoulder, because Ms. O'Keefe told me that the diaper service was for the children, and she did not think that a lady of her extreme breeding ought to do the wash of a 34-year-old bedwetter. You can imagine a man of my stature in the community starting off each morning with a load of wash. But once I got my wash out of the way, help was at hand. I used to keep a quart of vodka in the refrigerator. Children used to call that Daddy's juice. And I would take a few bangs on Daddy's juice, and then the question was, would I throw up in front of all these people? I knew if I lit up a cigarette, it was all over. Sooner or later, I took the train into Grand Central, and you understand that Grand Central is really not a railroad terminal. Grand Central is a collection of saloons that are connected by tunnels. So I would tear around a tunnel and pop up like a mole here or there. And I would do a repair job, and then I'd head to the school, and as soon as I got into that imposing institution, my first thought was, how do I get out of here? And I'd get out, I'd tear across town, and I would steal. Every morning, I would steal money from the petty cash of a law firm, and then I'd be in business. And I'd end up in a bar down by the courthouse, where I really belonged. And I'd throw my dough up, and I'd buy one, and they'd buy one, and the bartender would buy one, and we'd all buy one. It was wonderful. And I had it figured out in some peculiar alcoholic way that I was particularly brilliant at 2 o'clock. So I'd schedule classes for 2, and I'd be up there, shortchange those kids, and be out of there, and tear over to Grand Central to commute. Now, even though I grew up in the Bronx, I understood the theory of commuting. Commuters are entitled to a drink before they get on the train. So I'd have 10 or 12, and I'd take a train going north. It didn't have to go to Larchmont. North was good enough for me. I got to see a hell of a lot more of Stamford, Connecticut than I needed, I'll tell you. Sooner or later, I'd arrive back home and bounce off the walls and take what was left of Daddy's juice out of the refrigerator and inquire if anybody wanted a martini. But I was the only one that drank in that house in those days, and I'd have a few pops. Then I would eat or not eat, depending on my mood. Evenings I would spend in civic endeavor. Lawyers are very fond of civic endeavor. Civic endeavor by me was cracking up the car or puking on some hostess's sofa or playing a little grab-ass with the ladies of Larchmont and a sorrier-looking crop you have never seen. Most nights I would just stay home and vegetate. And I'd watch television with one eye like this. Try to get those sets to come together. And I'd watch the television with one eye and I'd drink. And I'd go through the programming and through the news and on into the morning. And finally, my big moment would come when they played the national anthem. And the Marines would go up Mount Suribachi. And the destroyers would be coming through the water. And they would play that song. And I would cry. Oh. I would weep and sob and cry. Oh. And then I'd go upstairs and wet the bed. That's it. I was a great leaker. I leaked from all ends. Now, this is not once in a while. This is every day. Weekends, I would say, for binges. And if everybody around me would mind their own business, which was extremely rare, I could get drunk 3 times on Saturday and 3 times on Sunday. Well, as anybody who's ever been married can tell you, while all of this was going on, Mrs. O'Keefe was not entirely silent. From time to time, she would have the temerity to suggest there was something radically wrong with the way I drank. But I pay no attention to her. Why should I? First of all, she is my wife. How much can she know? Secondly, she's not an attorney. And I would explain to her the relativity of drinking, which is to say that some people drink more than other people. And on a relative scale, I would explain to her I was not a big drinker. As a matter of fact, I would say, I don't drink as much as my mother. And she would say, nobody drinks as much as your mother. So I'd have to leave because she had offended my mother. And I go over and see Mom, and we really do a number. Well, this drove her completely out of her mind, and so she consulted with her physician, who, as you might imagine, is an obstetrician. And he could find nothing the matter with her until she told him that she had to live with this drunk. And that explained a great deal to him, and he sent her home with a message. And the message she brought me was that her doctor, the obstetrician, had diagnosed her husband, the professor of law, as an alcoholic. Oh, I was so upset. I rose to defend myself, as was my custom, and I launched into one of my tirades, and the first point I made was a pretty good point, I thought. I took a very dim view of a physician who would diagnose a patient without having seen the patient. I was against that shabby type of medical practice, all too common in our country today. And then I went into high gear, and I asked Mrs. O'Keefe a question to which she has not yet discovered the answer. I asked her what kind of a man became an obstetrician in the first place. And at this point, the conversation was coming downhill, and then it happened. I don't know how this happened. I have no answer for this. I cannot explain to you how this happened. I can explain to you many, many other things, and I probably will in the second or third hour of this terrific talk. My plane doesn't leave till 4. I hope you have some time. I suddenly stopped, and for the first time in my life, I stopped and I admitted to Mrs. O'Keefe, for the first time ever, that there was at least the possibility that I drank too much sometimes. This was a very serious tactical error. 3 days later, I was in a mental institution in Stamford, Connecticut. And I was only there a matter of moments when I discovered a very serious architectural deficiency in the building. There was no doorknob on my side of the door. And I was overcome with great feelings of outrage and self-pity because in addition to everything else bad that was going on, it also happened to be the occasion of my 35th birthday. And I mentioned this to a man in a white coat who was passing through. And I very carefully explained to that cretin that on that very day I had attained age 35, and therefore, under the Constitution of the United States of America, I was eligible for the office of president. He urged me not to plan any campaigns. He said there were 2 other presidents in residence. And then he went away and left me. So for the next week or so, I did all those wonderful, warm, happy, and interesting things that alcoholics do. When they withdraw from alcohol, I shook, I sweat, I did everything else you can think of pleasant. And I finally came up for air, and was visited by the staff of the hospital. This is a very fancy rattlebox, as befitted a man of my stature. And the staff, of course, were psychiatrists. And they visited me, and I gave 3 different psychiatrists 3 totally different stories. And they came back the next day and told me that I was in grave danger of being expelled from a mental institution. They told me I wasn't cooperating. And I was cooperating. I was playing Monopoly with 3 guys in the day room there, and they weren't alcoholics. They were just there. And one of them was under the impression that I was his real estate broker. And if you know anything about the game of Monopoly, and some nut thinks you're his real estate broker, you can do very, very well. And I had the boardwalk, I had a couple of hotels, and I was very happy with the Monopoly therapy. And I was into it for a couple of days, and they told me I would have a visitor, and I didn't know what that was. So I went into my large executive-type padded cell, and I waited for my visitor, and through the door of that room came this very imposing guy, and he told me he was from the Darien, Connecticut group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the hospital had given up on me, and they thought he could talk to me about our program. Well, all I heard was Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was up out of that chair like a shot. I almost had the son of a bitch by the neck. I said, alcohol, what are you, out of your mind? And I started with him. And he told me to shut up. Well, I immediately forgave him because I intuitively knew that they had neglected to tell him who I was. So I began to tell him who I was. He told me to sit down and to shut up and to listen to him. Well, he was an imposing-looking guy, and I was not a well person. And so for the first time in 35 years, I sat. And he began to explain to me as I have been trying to indicate to you, and as we are instructed in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, what we were like, how we came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and what life has been since. And he told me this very, very interesting story. And he said, would you like to go with me to meetings? And I said, do you mean outside to meetings, sir? He said, outside. I said, I'm going. Besides that, he gave me matches. Nobody else had allowed me to have any matches. Seemed like a good deal to me. And that's how it began, and that was in January of 1963. And he rode me around, and he made arrangements for me to go locally, and I came out of there, and I began to attend the meetings locally. And I don't remember so much of all of that. I was too new and too nervous and too afraid and too everything. And they had turned me loose with a large jar of those pills that they insist on giving alcoholics, and I was walking around eating that stuff, and my head buzzed a lot. But I know myself fairly well. I figured I would come to Alcoholics Anonymous. You would recognize me as a superior person. You would elect me your president. I was always president if I joined something. I would serve a term as your president, and that would be the end of it. It'd be onward and upward. Well, poor Herbie Foote had to drive me around because I got drunk. And I lasted 10 months, and I got very drunk. And this time, of course, I was drunk with a great difference, because I had turned away from the great power that is in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was to stay drunk for a period of time. And I won't take you through that because it just takes too long and it makes me nervous. But just let me indicate to you that this was without question, the worst period of my life. It was murder. It was pure and simple murder. I would drink a week, then I wouldn't drink a month. I would drink a month, then I wouldn't drink a week. I would drink and go to the meetings. I would go to the meetings, and then I would drink. I never knew when I'd be drinking. I certainly never knew where I'd be when I was finished drinking. And things began to happen to me in this period of time that had never happened to me before. And I do not speak to you now of things that happened to me that I no longer consider them to be important. I do not speak to you now of the fact that I was dismissed from the faculty and fired as a tenured professor of law, and that all of the honors and all of the appointments and all of the prestige and all of the dollars that went with that position were taken from me in about 15 minutes. I do not speak to you of the fact that I was in serious, and I mean very serious, personal, professional, and financial difficulties. I do not even speak to you of the fact that I had lost the affection of all those who were around me. All of this happened to me in this period of time, but this is not what I am speaking to you about. What I now recognize was happening to me, and what happened in my case, and perhaps in yours, was that there was a terrible, terrible disintegration of my spirit. My spirit, that thing that separates me from my cat and separates me even from each of you. That spirit which gives to this particular form whatever individuality or personality or character that it might have. And this was a spirit which once burned in me so bright, and it was extinguished, and I knew it, and there was nothing I could do about it. I had been here, and this didn't work for me. And by this time, I'd been everywhere else. I've been through the hospitals and the drying out places and the dumps, and I've been through the doctors and the nurses and my friends and the politicians and the money. And I've been up and down every avenue there was for alcoholics. And the result was always the same. I was drunk. And it wasn't as though I didn't know about alcoholism. I knew about alcoholism. I had a memory. I remembered the neighborhood. I knew about my family. I had been to the funerals. I knew why they died. And if I gave this any thought at all, I guess I thought to myself, well, if this is the way it is, then this is the way it is. And truly, as I am before you, truly, I never thought that I would stop drinking. I never thought it would happen. And then one day, my time came one day. My time came one day. I don't know any more about this than you do, but it seems to me that there is a time for all of us. And there is a time for each of us. I say to you that there is a line somewhere beyond which we are simply not permitted to sink. And I say to you, there is a point somewhere below which we are not permitted to go. And it seems to me that there is a level of pain somewhere beyond which no human is required to endure. And I don't know where this line is for you. I only know what happened to me. And this is a personal and an individual thing. And it is different in each case. And for some, it may be death. And that's the way it was for my brother Billy. They called one night from Minneapolis, and the man said that my brother was dead in the Veterans Hospital, that he had died of alcoholism. They had taken him to the Veterans Hospital when he had collapsed on the Skid Row of Minneapolis. And so my brother and my hero died the way alcoholics oftentimes do, without friends, without family. And he was a long, long way from our neighborhood. But my brother Billy doesn't drink anymore. And that's what happened to him. And for other people, it can be something trivial. But that line is there somewhere. And we all come to it in our own time and in our own way. But come to it, we must. I arrived at a day that really wasn't so different from many, many other days. I was 2 or 3 days away from a drink. I was in this place where I worked. I was nervous. I was thirsty. I was thinking about going down the lobby of the building and getting a drink. But I was given the great grace and opportunity to call a longtime friend of mine and a longtime member of this program. And his name is John, and he is my sponsor. And I told him what was going on, and he came over, and he looked so good, and I felt so bad. And I asked him what I would have to do in order to be as successful as he was in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he gave me that look that he has. And he said, don't drink. And go to meetings, you'll be all right. Well, I didn't want him to tell me that. And I told him I didn't want him to tell me that. I said, you see, you really don't understand the problem. The real problem here is this place where I work. lawyer of my talent should be in a place like this. He said, well, don't drink. You go to meetings. You'll be all right. I said, at home it's worse. I'm in big trouble up there. Well, he said, don't drink, and you go to the meetings. That'll work out. I said, I'm being sued by a bank. He said, I heard about that. Well, don't drink. You go to meetings. I sensed there was no dialogue there. I wish I could be a sponsor the way he was. His good friend Tom is here. And I would say to him, I don't feel well. He'd say, well, this may be as good as you'll ever feel. I would say to him, when am I going to get a good job? He said, you had one. I said, I'm very, very nervous. What should I do? He said, hang on. I said, how do you hang on? He said, let go. So he made a couple of phone calls. He said, come on, you're not doing anything. He took me over to Grand Central, and he stuck me on a train up to Larchmont. You know, it's about a 40-minute ride. Halfway up, I reconsidered. What the hell did I call him for? I must have panicked there for a minute. Don't drink, right? Don't drink my ass. Wait till this train stops. And that was my attitude, and I got off the train at the Larchmont station, and Al Dorsey was standing on the platform, and Al was then chairman of the world-famous Mamaroneck Group. And Al said, get in the car. I said, get out of here. I don't hang around with mailmen. You know? Al said, get in the car. A guy called me about you from New York. Get in the car, get in the car. Man of my stature cannot afford to have a fist fight with a mailman. Or anybody else, for that matter. So I got in Al's car. I said, Al, I'm in deep shit now. He said, well, don't drink. You'll go to meetings. You'll be all right. Don't drink. And he drove me around, and he took me up to the world famous that night. And I haven't had a drink since. And that was November the 24th, 1965. But first I had that day. And I had that day because two members of this fellowship were so filled with the gratitude of this fellowship that they took what God sent that day, a drunken, dishonest, arrogant man. And because they were so very grateful for what they had received, they gave me the day. They made me a gift of one day. And because of that day, I remain convinced all of the other days have followed. And I hope it is with that same sense of gratitude that I'm able to be with you this morning. Because like Al and like John, and every member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have this enormous obligation and debt to pay. And this is one of the ways I do it. They had me running around. John said to me, based on your background, your education, and your superior intellect, I think about 7 meetings a week ought to do it for you. So they had me running around every day. I go to 8 meetings a week now. I don't think I can stay sober any differently than I got sober. I'm still going all the time. And I've been hanging around about 3-4 months and going to meetings every day. And I would see John every day, and I'd see Al every night, and I'd get my instructions. And one day John said to me, and by this time I was sort of used to him. One day he said to me, trouble with you is you are ignorant. I said, yes, John, I certainly am. Said, please tell me in what respect you find me ignorant so that I can amend my behavior. He said, you think that you came to Alcoholics Anonymous to stop drinking. I said, that had occurred to me. That is right. He said, you think Alcoholics Anonymous is for drinking. I said, yes, the name would give you a clue, you know. He said, Alcoholics Anonymous is not for drinking. He said, if your problem is drinking, just stop it. Knock it off. He said, Alcoholics Anonymous is an entirely new way of living. And if you're going to enjoy that way of living, you better read that book. He said, read the big book. Because I was, like all pigeons, fresh and smart-ass. I said, I have read the big book. He said, good, read it again. And because I knew him so well, I knew that no conversation with that man was over until I said, yes, John. So I said, yes, John. And if you're having problems with your sponsor, you know how to handle that? You say, yes, John. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And I read again the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is very painful to remember. He was right. I had no idea that that book had been written some 5 years after Bill met Bob in Akron. Did not understand that the book is nothing more than a chronicle of the early members of this program. Did not understand that the steps that are contained in the 5th chapter of that book are steps literally taken by 100 or so men and women as they become sober. I thought when first I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, if I said to you my name was Ray O'Keefe and I was an alcoholic, I was doing something about the first step of this program. Of course, that's my name, and I'm an alcoholic. But the men and women who founded our program did a great deal more than identify themselves as alcoholics. They admitted that they were powerless over alcohol, that their lives were unmanageable. And their lives were unmanageable because they were powerless over alcohol. It was all the same with them. They were powerless. They had no power. They were without power. It says in our book that the dilemma of the alcoholic is his lack of power. He has no power. He is powerless. But they didn't drink. And time began to pass for them. And time has passed for the Great Unity Breakfast. Time has passed for me. And if you come here new, my brother, time will pass for you. Time has a wonderful way of passing in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It passes one day at a time. And somewhere after this great succession of days, these men and these women came to believe that there was a power greater than their own. And they believed that that power could restore them to sanity. And this was not just a casual observation that they made. They believed this. This was part of them. They believed that there was a power greater than their own. And as they believe, I believe. And so great and so real and so true was that belief that they were able to make a decision to turn over their will and their lives to the care of this power that they had come to believe in, this God, as they each understood him. And they were very, very bright, because at a time in the history of this country when no one else had this notion, they conceived alcoholism to be a disease. They conceived it to be a disease that was mental and physical and spiritual, a disease of the body and of the mind and of the spirit. And when they stopped drinking, they found that their bodies responded quickly. And when they came to believe, they enjoyed a mental recovery. It was a little slower than the physical recovery, but they could notice it. It was perceptible. And when they made that decision, that was the key that opened the door. That not only set down a basis for a spiritual recovery, it set down a basis for a spiritual way of life to which you and I are heir. They left that to us. And they were smart enough to know, too, that it isn't enough to stop drinking and start praying. A lot of people have tried that. It doesn't work. They knew that if they were to be successful, if they were to be sober, somehow they would have to change. And in order to effect this change in themselves, they began a searching and a fearless moral inventory of themselves. They sought to determine the exact nature of their wrongs. And when they were finished with that inventory, so great was the love and the affection of these people one for the other, even as I observe the love and the affection of you people one for the other, they were able to take this inventory to someone and to share it with them. And it was my sponsor who made clear to me the exact nature of my wrongs. And then they developed an attitude which came hard to someone like me. They came entirely ready to have God remove all their defects of character. And with compelling logic, they went to that great power that they had come to believe Him. And they asked that power, their Creator, and they said to Him, I want you to take everything from me, the good and the bad, that stands in the way of my being useful to you and to my fellows. They asked that they would do His bidding. And it began to work for them. And it's worked for millions of people since. And if anything is ever written or thought or spoken about this program, the one thing upon which there should be unanimous opinion is that it works. And if anybody ever doubted that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works, all you'd have to do is bring them into this room at this minute and tell them to look around at the alcoholics of Westchester County. It works. It really works. And they knew they had not come here alone. They knew that in their lives, as in mine, there was a great deal of wreckage. And so they wrote a list of everyone they had ever harmed. And they became willing to make amends to everyone on that list. And they didn't just talk about it, they did it. You may remember our literature tells us that Dr. Bob, the very first day that he stopped drinking, he got home late that night, and Bill asked him where he'd been. And he said he was driving around Akron, Ohio, in his old Buick, mending fences. It's an old Vermont expression. He was making amends the very first day that he began to stop drinking. And I don't think we should wait so long in our program to do everything that's required of us, especially so when the benefits are so terrific. You remember what it tells us? It says if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. It says we will know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past or wish to shut the door upon it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. It says no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience will benefit others. It says that feeling of selfishness and uselessness will slip away. Self-seeking will leave us. We will lose fear of people and of economic insecurity. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. And finally, the ultimate promise. We will know that God is doing for us everything we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. And I'm in a position to tell you that each and every one of these promises has come into my life, wholly, solely, and simply because I'm a member of this fellowship. And by this time, our founding members were fairly sober. The book says there had been a restoration to sanity. And they knew what had been given to them was something very precious. And they knew they wanted to keep it and to watch it and let it grow.
And so they continued to take personal inventory. They knew they could not enjoy the luxury of a resentment. They could not be resentful or hateful. If they were resentful or hateful, they would drink. And if they drank, they would die. It was simple with them. And so when they were wrong, they promptly admitted that they were wrong. And so real and so true was their reliance upon a power greater than their own, that they resolved that they would improve their conscious contact with God. And they did that by prayer and by meditation. They meditated. They gave thought to their condition. They considered who they were and what they were. And they engaged in a very excellent form of meditation. It is the form of meditation in which you are now engaged. They listened. They listened. On the odd chance that this power that they had come to believe in would speak to them. And this power that they had come to believe in did speak to them in their groups, at their meetings. And then they prayed, brothers. They prayed. Nobody needs a sermon from me on the value of prayer. When they prayed only for knowledge of God's will for them and the power to carry that out. I can never tell how it was with you, but it always seemed to me, from the time I was very, very young, I had this terrible feeling of not belonging. I knew I did not belong with that family. I knew I was in the wrong neighborhood. I didn't want to go through those schools. And the odd part about it in my case was that this feeling of not belonging was very strong, and it persisted even though I was successful. I was good at school. I was good at work. I lived in the right place. I had the right house. Nothing was ever enough. Nothing was ever enough for me. There was never enough of this, never enough of that, because I didn't belong. I couldn't go home. I didn't belong there. I knew I didn't belong in those dumpy bars. And I persisted. I had this terrible, terrible time with it. I just spent a lifetime on the outside looking in. And then I came here. And you taught me to pray. And in the 12 and 12, in the last paragraph on the chapter on prayer, it says to us one of the greatest benefits of prayer is the sense of belonging that comes to us. We are no longer lost or alone or frightened or purposeless. That despite all of the evidence in the world around us, we understand that the real values of life are truth and justice and love. And we know that a loving God watches over us. And we know that when we turn to Him, all will be well with us here and hereafter. And I am able to report to you that that sense of belonging has come to me. When I tell you my name is Ray O'Keefe, and I am an alcoholic and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am really telling you, as Harry says, who I am and what I am and where I belong. And that's important to me. It isn't so much that I have received the incredible honor of coming to speak at a Unity breakfast. I belong here. I'm supposed to be here. You are my people. This is my meeting. I belong here. And that's what it means to me. A little later, they came upon another prayer. And they prayed for a peace of mind. Just peace of mind. So they asked God to grant them the serenity to accept the things they could not change. And they did change. Something happened to these people. Something has happened to me. Something happens to everyone who comes here. Something happens to everyone who puts this program into their lives and puts their life into this program. There was a great difference in these men and women. There's a great difference between being drunk and being sober. And this difference they termed a spiritual awakening. And they had this spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And these were the men and the women who at the beginning of this process had admitted they were hopeless and helpless and powerless. These were the ones who had no power. But having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, they found that they held in their hands and in their hearts and in our program one of the greatest sources of spiritual power that the world has ever seen. They actually had the power to arrest the disease of alcoholism. They actually had the power to save life. And the only thing they were using was the great power of example of one drunk for another. And armed with that power, and having had that kind of a spiritual awakening, they began to carry the message to the alcoholic. And they did that so well that you and I have come together on a morning in April in 1988 at the Ryetown Hilton in Westchester County. And that, my dear, dear brothers, is a long, long way from Akron, Ohio. And they knew what my sponsor told me was true. They knew that what had been given to them was something much different than a simple device to keep people from drinking. They knew what had been handed to them as a free gift of the God of their understanding was an entirely new way of living. And in order to enjoy that new way of living, they resolved that they would practice principles in all their affairs. And so where they had been, as I always was, very dishonest, they tried not to be dishonest. Where they had been, as I always was, very arrogant, they tried not to be so arrogant. Happily for me, and perhaps for us all, they said that we are not saints. They said that this is not a program of spiritual perfection, it is a program of spiritual progress. And my sponsor has instructed me, and so I believe that I can progress in this program if I don't drink and go to the meetings. I could keep you until tomorrow to tell you all of the good things that have happened to me since I became a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Most of you know me, and you know what's going on with me, and I would not keep you so long. If you have a good wish for me, and I am sure that you do, please be assured that anything you might wish for me has already happened in my life, wholly, solely, and simply because I am a member of this program. Everything that the disease of alcoholism took from me, every single thing that alcoholism took from me, this program has returned to me in ways that are so mysterious that I've long since stopped wondering about them. Every single position, every single honor, every single appointment, every single dollar has all been given back to me. So I'm at a point now where by going to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, there really isn't anything else that I need or want. And it's been that way for quite a while. I would be very remiss if I did not express my deep appreciation for you allowing me to come back, especially to this meeting. 20 breakfasts ago, we didn't know what this would turn into. We had no idea. We thought it would be a good idea if the groups of Westchester got together at least once a year in a nice setting to meet with each other and to express their affection for each other. No idea. I begged the committee 20 times. It's a terrible feeling of rejection they give me. I am, as you know, one of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous who travels a great deal. I spent last weekend in Texas, and I'll spend next weekend in Canada. And everywhere I go, I say the same thing. I only have the one story, and I can't apologize for that. And when I end, and now it's the end, I talk about a pamphlet that's very dear to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's called The Member's View of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in that pamphlet, at the very end, the author takes a biblical turn. And he recalls a time when John the Baptist was once again languishing in one of Herod's prisons. And John sent two of his friends to inquire of his cousin Jesus as to whether or not he was the Messiah. And so these two men found the Lord, and they walked with him a while. And one day they stopped him, and they said to him, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the one that we have been waiting for? Or should we wait for another?" And the Lord really didn't answer that question. But he said to these two men, "Go back to John and tell John only what you have seen and only what you have heard. And tell John that the blind see. And tell John that the lame can walk. Tell John that the deaf can hear and that the sick are made well. And tell John that the poor have the gospel brought to them." In my early training, I was told that the word poor in that context could mean poor in spirit. And everyone knows that the word gospel simply means good news. And so, my dear, dear brothers, in 20th Unity Breakfast assembled, if you will accept a report from me, I will tell you only what I have seen and only what I have heard. And based upon that observation, it seems to me that the blind do see and the lame do walk. And I know that the deaf can hear. And most certainly, the sick are made well. And I have seen over and over and over again, through the longest day and into the darkest night, the good news of this program brought to the alcoholic who suffers the poor in spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. You truly are one of a kind. I should say the committee, but if you'll please come up, Ray, I have just a token of our appreciation for you for coming here. This is a portrait of Ray. And it's painted by our chairman, Paul Dillon. I thought he could have been a little kinder to you on the hair. However, it's with deep appreciation that the committee extends this gift to you, Ray, for this morning. And thank you very much. And would you
Thank you very much for the portrait of that overweight gentleman. Would you all join us in the Lord's Prayer, please? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done